In 1974, Black Sabbath stepped onto the California jam stage as rock's most powerful empire. Their albums went platinum before release. Their tours commanded $75,000 per night. Their dark imagery moved millions in merchandise. That night, they played to 250,000 people and earned $250,000 for a single performance. But when the show ended, each exhausted band member received just $1,000. The remaining $246,000? It vanished into a web of shell companies created by their management company, Worldwide Artists. This wasn't just about missing money. It was the systematic looting of a $100 million empire through management practices that would later be outlawed. In 1969, Tony Iommi reported for his last shift at a Birmingham sheet metal factory. Years of working with metal would come in handy, just not the way his bosses expected. 2 streets over, John "Ozzy" Osbourne clocked out of his final day testing car horns. Geezer Butler left his trainee accountant job, while Bill Ward quit the local pub. None of them knew they were about to build one of rock's biggest empires. Their band, Earth, was going nowhere. The Birmingham club circuit paid barely enough to cover petrol money. Playing blues covers to half-empty pubs wasn't exactly the fast track to stardom. But then they noticed crowds lining up for a horror film playing across from their rehearsal space. Black Sabbath, the movie, was making a fortune by scaring people. The band changed their name, and their fortunes changed with it. The new Black Sabbath got rejected by 14 record labels before Philips Records took a chance on them. The contract offered just £400, barely enough to cover a week's studio time. But that's all they needed. Their self-titled debut album was recorded in just 2 days, capturing the raw, heavy sound that would revolutionize rock music. While other bands were singing about peace and love, Black Sabbath tapped into darker themes. The critics called it evil noise. The kids called it the future of rock. The album hit number 8 in the UK and stayed there for 42 weeks. From playing half-empty Birmingham pubs, they were now selling out 10,000-seat venues. In an era when most rock bands struggled to sell 50,000 copies, Black Sabbath moved 500,000 units in their first 6 months. Their manager, Jim Simpson, had a relentless strategy: 300 shows per year, each one bigger than the last. By early 1971, they'd sold over 1 million albums. During a lunch break between shows, the band wrote a new song called Paranoid. 20 minutes later, they had what would become their signature hit. The album of the same name reached number 1 in the UK and number 12 in the US. Black Sabbath was now selling out 10,000-seat venues. By early 1971, they'd sold over 1 million albums. But success attracted predators. A man named Patrick Mian approached them with promises of American tours and bigger paydays. His Worldwide Artist Management Company handled real rock stars, not just local boys from Birmingham. Simpson had gotten them this far, but Mian had connections. He talked about private planes, stadium shows, and merchandising empires. In September 1970, Black Sabbath signed with Mian. Patrick Mian moved fast. Within weeks of signing with Worldwide Artists, Black Sabbath was on their first American tour. Their old tour bus was replaced with first-class flights. Holiday Inns became Hilton Suites. The band was playing to sold-out crowds in New York, Los Angeles, and Chicago. This was what success looked like. The money poured in. Black Sabbath's first 2 albums were selling 100,000 copies every month. Paranoid dominated radio stations across Europe and America. The band's dark image translated perfectly into merchandise. T-shirts, posters, and badges flew off the shelves at every show. By late 1971, their empire was generating over $100,000 per month in revenue. Their third album, Master of Reality, marked Mian's first major move. The production budget jumped from £400 to $60,000. The band spent 2 weeks in the studio instead of 2 days. The result? their first album to go gold before release. Soon, they were commanding $50,000 per night, playing 5 shows a week. The Empire's foundation seemed solid. Then came Volume 4 in 1972. The band spent $75,000 on cocaine, more than the album's production budget. Private planes flew in fresh supplies between shows. Ozzy bought custom cars. Tony acquired a mansion. And Mian encouraged it all. "Spend like stars," he told them. "You're making more than you can spend." The relentless schedule, 300 shows a year plus recording sessions, kept them too exhausted to notice the warning signs. Mian had structured their empire brilliantly, for himself. Each revenue stream fed into a different shell company. Merchandise profits went to worldwide retail. Tour income disappeared into global concert services. Album royalties were held for tax purposes in offshore accounts. The band saw just 10% of their own empire's revenue. The truth revealed itself at London's Rainbow Theatre in 1972. The show grossed £50,000, their biggest payday yet. Each band member received £1,000. When Geezer Butler questioned the missing £46,000, Mian produced pages of expenses: lighting costs, staff salaries, equipment rental, insurance fees. The numbers looked legitimate on paper, but every bill, every invoice, every contract led back to companies Mian secretly controlled. The Empire now generated over $100,000 per month. The band still lived like stars, but they were building someone else's fortune, one platinum album at a time. The first cracks appeared during the volume, 4 recording sessions in 1972. The album's $60,000 budget vanished in weeks. No problem. Mian arranged another $100,000. The band burned through that too. Then another $100,000. By the time they finished recording, they'd spent more on cocaine than the entire album cost to make. Volume 4 reached gold status in under a month. The band was now commanding $75,000 per night in arenas. Their merchandise empire expanded weekly: belt buckles, patches, rolling papers. A single shipment of T-shirts brought in $50,000. But for every dollar that came in, 90 cents vanished into Mian's web of companies. Behind the scenes, Mian executed his master plan. Publishing rights were transferred through a maze of paperwork. Equipment leases were structured so the band paid triple value but never gained ownership. Their cars, houses, even their instruments belonged to shell companies with names like Artist Asset Management and Creative Investment Holdings. Every contract reinforced his control. Former manager Jim Simpson sued for breach of contract in 1973, claiming he was owed percentages from the band's early success. To everyone's surprise, he won. The court awarded him £35,000, but ordered Mian to pay £27,500 of it. The remaining £7,500 came from the band. It was the first public crack in Mian's facade. For Sabbath, Bloody Sabbath in 1973, the band demanded to record in a castle. Mian didn't just approve, he encouraged it. Studio time, $200,000. Equipment rental, $150,000. Atmospheric enhancement, $100,000. Each inflated invoice funneled money back to his companies. California Jam should have been their crowning achievement. On April 6, 1974, they played to 250,000 people, their largest crowd ever. The math was simple: $250,000 for one show. But when the promoter's check arrived, each exhausted band member received just $1,000. The remaining $246,000 vanished into worldwide artists' accounts. Mian's explanation exposed the whole scheme. He claimed $50,000 for lighting that Deep Purple had rented for $15,000, $75,000 for a sound system shared by all bands, $25,000 for insurance policies that didn't exist, $60,000 for festival staff already on the promoter's payroll. Every expense was fabricated, every invoice inflated, every dollar redirected to companies Mian secretly controlled. Geezer Butler's accountant training finally revealed the truth. 3 years of performing rights payments showed impossibly low figures for a band selling millions. Every revenue stream had endless deductions. When Butler demanded answers, Mian buried him in paperwork. But one detail exposed everything. In 3 years of contracts, they'd never seen a single original document, only photocopies. The investigation uncovered Mian's systematic theft. Touring revenue disappeared into global concert services. Merchandise profits fed worldwide retail. Album royalties vanished into offshore accounts. Equipment leases funneled through shell companies. Every discovery led back to Mian. Every contract guaranteed his control. Every dollar the band earned made him richer. The $100 million empire they'd built was designed to enrich only one person, their manager. Then came the final blow. Their lawyers found the original 1970 contracts, not Mian's photocopies. The fine print was devastating. The band hadn't just signed a management deal. They'd surrendered complete ownership of their music. Every note belonged to Mian. Every lyric was his property. Every master recording fed his accounts. The $100 million empire they'd built from Birmingham factory floors now existed solely to enrich their manager. Enter Don Arden, the music industry's most feared figure. Known as the Al Capone of pop, Arden's reputation was built on solving problems by any means necessary. His daughter Sharon, later Sharon Osbourne, brokered the deal. Within weeks, Mian's empire began crumbling. His office was mysteriously burgled. Financial records vanished. Accounting documents burned. The lawsuits began in late 1974. The band sued Mian for £500,000 in stolen assets. He countersued for £2 million in contract violations. Each legal filing drained more money. Each court appearance cost thousands. Their next album title, Sabotage, reflected their reality. But by then, the damage was irreversible. Their publishing rights belonged to Mian's shell companies. Their equipment was repossessed by his leasing firms. Even their band name hung in legal limbo. Arden's intervention freed them from Mian, but at a devastating cost. 30% of all future earnings, control of their touring revenue, and ownership of their equipment. They'd escaped one devil's contract, only to sign another. Their empire wasn't just burning, it was being systematically demolished, brick by the very people claiming to save it. By 1975, Black Sabbath's empire had become a financial black hole. Legal battles with Mian devoured £50,000 monthly in lawyer fees. The UK tax authorities demanded £100,000 in back payments on revenue that had vanished into Mian shell companies. Don Arden offered a solution. He'd cover the bills for 30% of all future earnings. Their sold-out shows now barely covered the interest payments. Geezer Butler's financial investigation ended in a nervous breakdown. He'd traced millions in vanished revenue through a labyrinth of shell companies. Paranoid alone had earned $5 million. The band had seen $50,000. Their equipment leases revealed they'd paid for their gear 3 times over but owned nothing. Every contract led to another hidden company, another stolen fortune. Ozzy's downward spiral accelerated their financial collapse. Each cancelled show triggered massive penalties, $25,000 in venue fees, $15,000 for idle staff, $60,000 in legal settlements. Arden's solution? $2 million in high-interest loans using future touring income as collateral. The band now played 5 nights weekly just to cover interest payments, while their gear, cars, and homes carried crushing debt at 25% interest. They were earning more than ever but drowning faster with every show. The killing blow landed in 1977. Mian's lawyers revealed his contract's true scope. He owned not just their past catalog, but rights to their musical style. Any future songs deemed derivative of their early work would owe him royalties. Even their live performances of old songs required his permission. Buying back their rights would cost $15 million, money that existed only in their former accountants' ledgers. The Technical Ecstasy Tour became their empire's funeral procession. They still packed arenas, still generated $250,000 per night. But now every dollar was pre-assigned. 40% to loan payments, 30% to Arden, 20% to legal fees and settlements. The remaining 10% barely covered hotels and fuel. The world's biggest heavy metal band was earning less than their roadies. Their empire hadn't just collapsed, it had become their prison. Never Say Die became their empire's epitaph. The band scraped together studio time in 3-hour blocks, all they could afford. Each session cost $2,000. Half were wasted when Ozzy arrived too drunk to perform. Tony Iommi calculated the waste: $50,000 in unusable recordings, $75,000 in repeated sessions, $100,000 in delayed release penalties. An album titled For Defiance became an accountant's testimony to defeat. The music industry dissected their collapse like a cautionary autopsy. Iron Maiden built management contracts with monthly audits and instant termination clauses. Van Halen demanded direct payment from promoters. AC/DC split their publishing rights between 5 separate companies to prevent single-party control. The $100 million that vanished into Mian's web sparked a revolution in artist protection. Arden's rescue became their new trap. His companies controlled everything: touring revenue through Jet Records Live, album payments via worldwide rights management, equipment through Rock Asset Leasing. Each entity charged fees. Each fee generated interest. Each interest payment created new debt. Their 1978 UK tour grossed £2 million. The band received £50,000 total. Their road crew earned more from per diems than the band made in profits. Industry reforms traced directly to their collapse. Led Zeppelin required weekly accounting. Kiss created independent audit teams. Every major label contract now included artist protection clauses. The era of blind trust died in Black Sabbath's legal wreckage. Ozzy's firing in 1979 stemmed from mathematics as much as addiction. His unreliability had cost them $200,000 in canceled shows that year alone. 8 wasted recording sessions totaled $180,000. Insurance premiums hit $250,000, if they could get coverage at all. Every American promoter now demanded cash deposits before booking. Their empire's ruins couldn't support his chaos. The numbers painted their tragedy. 4 albums that earned $50 million generated $5 million for the band. Their 1977 to 1978 tour grossed $15 million. They split $300,000. Mian's companies collected paranoid royalties until 1995. Today, their early catalog generates millions in streaming revenue. The band's share remains under 10%. By 1979, the collapse was complete. Their empire, built from Birmingham factory jobs into a $100 million musical revolution, had been systematically looted, leveraged, and liquidated by the very people promising to protect it. The band that invented heavy metal's sound had also invented its darkest cautionary tale. Talent means nothing without control. Today, Black Sabbath's first 6 albums generate over $20 million annually in streaming revenue. The band's share, less than $2 million combined. Their former empire, worth nearly $100 million in 1970s dollars, would exceed $1 billion in today's market. The publishing rights they signed away in 1970 are worth more than every dollar they earned during their peak years. But their collapse transformed the music industry. Artist contracts now require monthly financial audits. Management companies must provide transparent accounting. Legal teams review every document. Annual independent audits are mandatory. Publishing rights have expiration clauses. The era of systematic exploitation died in Black Sabbath's wake. Their legacy extends beyond business reform. Metallica built their own record label. Nirvana demanded complete creative control. Pearl Jam fought Ticketmaster's monopoly. Each battle traced back to lessons learned from Black Sabbath's destruction. Their collapse became every artist's education. 4 working-class kids from Birmingham factories built rock's heaviest sound and its largest empire. Then they watched it vanish into a web of shell companies, hidden contracts, and broken promises. Their cautionary tale taught generations of musicians that in the business of rock and roll, the true demons don't carry pitchforks, they carry pens. The most dangerous contracts are written in the darkest ink.